My first conversation with Prabhupada was after the park. Prabhupada and the devotees rolled up the rug and left the park, and I had never heard of Hare Krishna before. It wasn't a popular thing as it is now. And some stranger came over to me and asked me if I'd like to go to the temple to see the Swami. And I didn't know what that was, but I intuitively felt there was something there. And so I went to the temple, and the first thing I saw, besides the devotees chanting in front of Prabhupada's, what they called the dais at that time, his Vyasasana, one devotee came over and gave me a chapati, which I immediately started eating. And while I was eating it, two other devotees were talking between themselves, and I overheard. And one of them was saying, the Swami just said that whenever devotees fight, it should be taken like clouds passing by. Because when clouds pass by, you hardly even notice it, or you don't notice it. So it should be taken as insignificant. And I thought that was pretty amazing, especially since at that time it was the Vietnam War and so many protests and everything was in turmoil. So I thought it was amazing.
Sometime later I got to go on a walk with Prabhupada on his famous morning walks, and at that time I had become a little bit known for distributing his books. And I think it was in the same year, later in that same year, 1972. And someone had said, Prabhupada, Tripuraridas is here, and he's distributing your books. And Prabhupada turned to me and opened his eyes quite wide, and he quoted the verse from Bhagavad Gita, that no one will ever be more dear to me than one who preaches the message of Bhagavad Gita. So he encouraged me along those lines, and I was already enthusiastic about that by his grace. So that further catapulted me into the kind of service that I did for quite a long time in his manifest presence, distributing his literature and inspiring others to do so.
And I remember asking him a question at the end of the talk. He asked if there was anybody who had questions. And I said, how does one become sincere? Because in my own mind, I had viewed that sincerity was a key quality in achieving self-realization. And so he said, you become sincere by being sincere. And he said, it's you just have to want this Krishna consciousness. You have to sincerely want to surrender to the spiritual master and to Krishna. And he talked a little bit about those things. And I remember that, and I remember that on at least 2 occasions later on, once in Africa and once in India, when I came into the room to see Srila Prabhupada and there were some life members in the room, he would introduce me and he would say, this is my disciple Bhagavat Das, and he is very sincere. And that struck me. It touched my heart that Prabhupada always remembered that I wanted to be sincere.
And then somebody invited me to come up to see the Swami in his apartment. So I went there, and there were about 10 or 15 devotees chanting japa, although I didn't know what they were chanting. And then Prabhupada was sitting in front of his little oval altar, which you saw in the Lilamrita, which is surrounded by the tall gladiola plants. And he offered his obeisances to one of the pictures of Krishna on the altar. And I was an impersonalist, and so I thought he was offering his obeisances to the floor because everything is God. And then he went into his back room, which was called the greeting room or the sitting room. And somebody asked me to go back there. So I didn't know anything. I was just following the requests. And in that room, I noticed that Prabhupada was reciprocating with everybody as they reciprocated with him. Whoever shook his hand, he shook their hand. Whoever did that, he did that. As they did with him, he was with them. So then he said to me, he said to everyone actually, he sat back, he was sitting on his mat, and he sat back and he said, we are eternal and everything around us is temporary. And because he's the external manifestation of Supersoul, you feel the power of the Supersoul speaking, and so it had a tremendous influence, just that statement. And then he asked me if I live nearby, and I said, oh yes, I live very near, because I thought I was all-pervading. But actually I lived an hour and a half away, and so he said, oh, very good, then you can come for morning classes. And although it would be very difficult, especially taking an hour and a half train ride from the Bronx to downtown Manhattan, by the power of his invitation, I felt obligated to do it, and I began taking the train in the mornings. So that was my first experience with him.
Well, what stands out in my mind on the morning walks is that Prabhupada always used to ask me, so, Tripurari Maharaj, what are they saying? That was his standard kind of question to me, because he knew I was always in the field, preaching to people, distributing the literature and so forth, and that I would need arguments to counteract, and he was curious what their arguments were. So then I would give them each time I would give one or two of their arguments, and Prabhupada would defeat it in an enlightening way. And
does any come to mind?
Well, some, yeah. Once in Mayapur I told Prabhupada that, well, they're saying that we should use our intelligence to understand and figure out the absolute knowledge or the truth of life, and apply ourselves with all of our God-given type of reasoning, as if to say Krishna consciousness was deviating from reasoning. It does go beyond reasoning, but it picks up where reasoning leaves off. At any rate, I presented something like that, an argument to that effect, and Prabhupada immediately replied, okay, so use your intelligence, read the Bhagavad Gita, study Bhagavad Gita. And usually in short bursts like that, he would come back and give the response. One time in Vrindavan, he asked me what they're saying, and I said, Prabhupada, they're saying that we are parasites, that we're simply leeching off the society. And in this way, carrying on, but we're not contributing anything. And then he said, so, stop giving. And then everyone was silent. He said, but you can't. That's all he said, but it was very profound, and I appreciated it, the point that you say we're only parasites, then we say then stop giving. But someone else is supplying us. This Sankirtan movement is going on not because you're supporting us. You're benefiting by participating. The support is coming from above. Krishna's in the background. He's supplying. He's supporting.